Declaro abierta la sesión número 9990 del Consejo de Seguridad. En el orden del día provisional de esta sesión figura el siguiente punto: mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad de Ucrania. Queda aprobado el orden del día. De conformidad con el artículo 37 del Reglamento Provisional del Consejo, invito a participar en esta sesión a las delegaciones de Alemania, Estonia, Noruega, Polonia, Rumanía y Ucrania. Así queda acordado. En nombre del Consejo, doy la bienvenida a la excelentísima señora Yulia Sviridenko, primera ministra de Ucrania, que nos acompañará en el curso de la sesión. De conformidad con el artículo 39 del Reglamento Provisional del Consejo, invito a participar en esta sesión al señor Miroslav Yencha, subsecretario general para Europa, Asia Central y las Américas del Departamento de Asuntos Políticos y de Consolidación de la Paz y del Departamento de Operaciones de Paz. Así queda acordado. De conformidad con el artículo 39 del Reglamento Provisional del Consejo, invito a participar en esta sesión al excelentísimo señor Stavros Lambrinidis, jefe de la delegación de la Unión Europea ante las Naciones Unidas. Así queda acordado. El Consejo de Seguridad comenzará ahora el examen del punto 2 del orden del día. Doy ahora la palabra al señor Miroslav Yencha.
Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente. Mr. President, yesterday the Secretary General condemned the Russian Federation's overnight missile and drone attacks that killed and injured many civilians, including children, across Ukraine. According to Ukrainian officials, the Russian Federation launched 598 drones and 31 missiles against Ukraine overnight between 27 and 28 August. In the capital city of Kyiv, at least 23 people, including 4 children aged between 2 and 17, were reportedly killed. At least 64 people, including 7 children, were injured. Several buildings were damaged in 33 locations across all 10 districts of the city. Most of the fatalities occurred in the Darnitsky district of Kyiv, where a missile reportedly struck a 5-story residential building, demolishing it from the 1st to the 5th floor. The attack also severely damaged the diplomatic premises of the delegation of the European Union in Kyiv and the British Council building. Across Ukraine, air raid sirens kept residents awake, seeking shelter in nearly all regions of the country. Civilian casualties were reported in Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Kherson regions of Ukraine. In Vinnytsia region, a Russian attack reportedly struck a train depot. Yesterday's strikes are only the latest in the brutal escalation of countrywide aerial attacks. Just a week ago, overnight between 21 and 22 August, Russia reportedly launched 574 drones and 40 missiles on Ukraine. As a result, 1 person was killed in the western city of Lviv. In the southwestern Transcarpathia region, 15 people were wounded. These strikes on regions far from the front lines demonstrate the dangerously expanding geographic scope of this war. In July, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, recorded rising civilian casualties across 18 regions of Ukraine and in Kyiv city. With at least 1,674 civilian casualties, 286 killed, and 1,388 injured, July set a new tragic record for monthly casualties since May 2022. In total, OHCHR has verified that since the start of the Russian Federation's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, 14,054 civilians, including 730 children, have been killed in Ukraine. 36,164 civilians, including 2,263 children, have been injured. The impact of the conflict has also spread to the Russian Federation, where local authorities have reported civilian casualties, including in the Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk regions bordering Ukraine. On 24 August, Russian officials reported that a fire broke out after a Ukrainian drone was shot down near the Kursk nuclear power plant, damaging a transformer at the site. We have also several reports of Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries inside Russia. While the United Nations is not in a position to verify these reports, the growing impact of the conflict on the civilian population in the Russian Federation is of concern too. We once again reiterate that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure violate international humanitarian law. We condemn all such attacks wherever they occur. They are unacceptable and must end immediately. Mr. President, we are also concerned about the impact of the expanding and escalating fighting on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine as we are entering the fourth winter of the full-scale war. The United Nations remains fully committed to supporting Ukrainian civilians. So far this year, together with our humanitarian partners, we have reached 3.8 million people with aid. Furthermore, targeted winter support preparations are underway for 1.7 million people through the 2025-2026 winterization response plan. However, for us to be able to continue our life-saving work, scaled up and flexible donor support is urgently needed. We also continue to urge the sides to fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law and allow for the safe, rapid, and unimpeded humanitarian access to civilians in need, no matter where they are or who controls the territory. Mr. President, the mounting death toll and devastation caused by the intensifying fighting over the summer run counter to the significant efforts over the past few months to give diplomacy a chance. The Secretary General has welcomed the recent diplomatic efforts led by the United States, including the meeting between the Presidents of the United States and the Russian Federation in Anchorage on 15 August, and the meeting between the Presidents of the United States and Ukraine and European leaders in Washington, D.C. on 18 August. We have also welcomed the earlier 3 rounds of direct talks between Ukraine and the Russian Federation in Istanbul between May and July. We commend the exchanges of prisoners of war that have continued to take place as a result of these contacts. Most recently, on 24 August, an exchange facilitated by the United Arab Emirates brought 146 prisoners home from each side. However, as large-scale attacks against civilians persist and civilian casualties rise, the current diplomatic momentum is at risk of rapidly fading if the focus on the need to end the violence and engage in genuine peace talks is not maintained. We therefore urge all concerned to urgently de-escalate the situation and to redouble efforts to create conditions for inclusive diplomatic efforts towards a cessation of hostilities and a just peace. On Sunday, 25 August, Ukraine marked its 34th Independence Day. That day also marked 3.5 years of full-scale war for the people of Ukraine and Russia, which has continued to be a source of instability regionally and globally. We renew the Secretary General's appeal for a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. A ceasefire that results in a just, comprehensive, and sustainable peace in Ukraine, one that fully upholds Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant UN resolutions. The United Nations remains ready to support all efforts to this end. I thank you.
Agradezco al señor Yencha la declaración que nos ha proporcionado. Doy ahora la palabra a los miembros del Consejo que deseen formular una declaración. Doy entonces la palabra a la delegación de Eslovenia.
Thank you, President. ASG Yencha, thank you very much for your insight and the contribution to this discussion. Mr. President, yesterday, Russia launched its second largest air assault since the start of the war. 620 drones and missiles were launched against Ukraine. The majority of them were directed at the country's capital. The attack on the city caused over 60 civilian casualties. Among them are at least 23 dead, including 4 children. Several multi-story residential buildings were destroyed. Shock waves from one of them damaged the nearby premises of the delegation of the European Union and the British Council. These are not military targets. Aerial attacks in massive waves on densely populated urban areas with explosive weaponry have no justification. They cannot be explained away by claims of pursuing military goals. Months of intensified attacks against civilians and civilian objects demonstrate a clear escalation of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. They took place while peace in Ukraine is being discussed. Slovenia reiterates its condemnation of these attacks, including the most recent one. They are a blatant violation of international humanitarian law, and they must not go unpunished. Mr. President, it was encouraging for Slovenia to hear both sides committing to peace this year, numerous times. However, hopes for peace are being contradicted by actions on the ground. 2025 is rapidly becoming the deadliest year of this war. In comparison to last year, civilian casualties in Ukraine have increased by almost 50%. As we just heard, this July set a new monthly record for civilian casualties since May of 2022. Throughout the year, Russia responded to offers of peace with drone and missiles, like the latest overnight attack which came in the midst of Ukraine's efforts to secure a summit meeting between both presidents. We are, however, stumbling on our path to peace. After months of engagement, tangible results are lacking. We need to refocus our discussions on stopping the bloodshed. We need an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Slovenia stands ready to work towards a just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter. All nations have the right to shape their own future, and all people deserve to enjoy peace, dignity, and freedom. It is time we empower Ukrainians to do just that. I thank you.
Agradezco a la representante de Eslovenia su declaración. Doy ahora la palabra a la delegación de Dinamarca.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Jenča for his informative and sobering briefing. Denmark, along with France, Greece, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom, supported Ukraine in its call for this urgent meeting. We did so, firm in our conviction that when faced with a clear and blatant threat to international peace and security, this Council has a responsibility to act. Just yesterday morning, as we've heard, Russian airstrikes once again rained down on Ukraine in what has been reported as the second largest wave of attacks in this brutal 3-year war. Denmark strongly condemns these attacks, which killed at least 23 civilians, including 4 children, and injured dozens more. One of those who tragically lost their lives was a 2-year-old girl, born during Russian airstrikes on Kyiv and killed by Russian airstrikes on Kyiv. Another life cruelly cut short by Russia's illegal war. To the government of Ukraine, Denmark extends its deepest condolences to you and to all those who've suffered in these latest attacks. Russia consistently claims that its targets are military in nature, but their missiles have regularly hit schools, hospitals, apartment blocks, and diplomatic missions. Yesterday, as we just heard from the Assistant Secretary General, the delegation of the European Union and the British Council in Kyiv were added to this long list. These violations of international law, including international humanitarian law, are regrettably not new. They have been long documented in many reports by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission and the Independent International Commission on Inquiry on Ukraine. Mr. President, we commend the United States' effort to stop the killing and continue to hope for a breakthrough towards a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. But we must remain vigilant. Russia's words about peace must be accompanied by actions for peace, not by attacks on civilians. Denmark believes that the only pathway to a lasting peace begins with the guns falling silent. The aggressor must stop attacking the victim. Hostilities must end. Russia must enter talks in good faith with Ukraine as a full and equal partner. Looking further ahead, as in any war, if there is to be a lasting peace, there must be justice and accountability. And the only just peace is one based on the United Nations Charter. Clear and robust security guarantees for Ukraine would also be essential for a lasting peace. Denmark and our partners have indicated a readiness to contribute to those. Our view is clear. Ukraine's security is Europe's security. Mr. President, to conclude, a few days ago, as we just heard also from the Assistant Secretary General, we celebrated the 34th anniversary of Ukraine's independence. It is a stark reminder of Ukraine's inherent right to freely chart its own path, a Ukraine in which children can grow up in peace and security, not to the sound of air raid sirens. Denmark will continue to stand with Ukraine today as Ukraine enters into its 35th years of independence. United, we are strong. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Dinamarca su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Francia.
Monsieur le Président, je souhaite d'abord remercier le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, Miroslav Jenša, pour son exposé. Si nous réunissons aujourd'hui, c'est pour rappeler la réalité de la guerre que le peuple ukrainien continue d'affronter chaque jour et que M. Jenša vient à nouveau de nous présenter. La France condamne avec la plus grande fermeté les attaques russes ayant frappé l'Ukraine ces derniers jours. Les frappes qui ont atteint l'ouest de l'Ukraine dans la nuit du 20 au 21 août et celles menées la nuit du 27 août sur Kiev ont fait des dizaines de victimes civiles, de nouvelles victimes, y compris des enfants. Les ondes de choc de dernière frappe ont gravement endommagé le bâtiment de la délégation de l'Union européenne en Ukraine et du British Council. Ces attaques sont inacceptables, comme toutes les attaques passées. Si besoin en était, cette barbarie témoigne à nouveau de l'urgence de mettre fin à cette guerre, l'urgence de cesser les tueries et de bâtir une paix juste et durable. La France exprime sa profonde solidarité avec les victimes et leurs familles endeuillées, ainsi qu'avec les services de secours mobilisés et le personnel de la délégation de l'Union européenne du British Council à Kiev. Elle salue la résilience des Ukrainiens qui résistent avec courage depuis 3 ans et demi à l'agression russe et qui font face à ses conséquences terribles avec une dignité qui nous oblige. Monsieur le Président, l'Ukraine a fait part, depuis 6 mois désormais, de sa disponibilité à mettre en place un cessez-le-feu immédiat et sans condition. Le président Volodymyr Zelensky a exprimé à plusieurs reprises sa disposition à engager des discussions directes avec le président Vladimir Poutine. Le principe d'une rencontre bilatérale a été acté dans le cadre de l'initiative du président Donald Trump en faveur d'une paix juste et durable que la France soutient. Pourtant, 2 semaines plus tard, le président russe n'a toujours pas donné suite et la Russie poursuit ses frappes meurtrières sur le territoire ukrainien. Moscou veut nous faire croire qu'il recherche la paix, mais ses actes démontrent qu'elle n'a aucune intention de cesser le feu, ni de négocier de bonne foi une paix durable en Ukraine. La Russie n'a fait que répondre aux multiples propositions sincères de pourparlers en intensifiant ses frappes sur le territoire ukrainien. Elle n'a fait que cibler les civils en violation des règles et principes du droit international. Faut-il le rappeler? Les attaques indiscriminées contre les civils constituent des crimes de guerre. Ce Conseil doit être à la hauteur de ses responsabilités. En février dernier, il a appelé à une fin rapide des hostilités dans sa résolution 2774. Alors que la Russie viole depuis des mois cette résolution, qu'elle a pourtant soutenue, le Conseil doit être cohérent. Il est clair que cette guerre ne se poursuit que parce que l'agresseur refuse d'y mettre un terme. Le Conseil de sécurité doit appeler la Russie à mettre fin au combat et condamner les violations du droit international humanitaire et des droits de l'homme qu'elle y commet. La France continuera de s'investir avec détermination aux côtés de l'Ukraine et de ses partenaires vers l'objectif d'une paix conforme au droit international, respectant la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine. Pour être durable, cette paix doit être assortie de garanties de sécurité robustes pour l'Ukraine. La France et les autres Européens, aux côtés des États-Unis, y sont engagés, car la sécurité de l'Ukraine est aussi la sécurité européenne. Je vous remercie.
Agradezco a la delegación de Francia su declaración. Doy ahora la palabra a la delegación de Grecia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Panama for a successful stewardship of this Council during the month of August. I would like to thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. Mr. President, despite intensified international efforts to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, Russia persists in its attacks against major urban centers, civilians, and critical infrastructure. The most recent missile and drone strikes on Ukraine cities, which resulted in the killing and wounding of civilians, including children, and the destruction of numerous buildings, seriously undermine efforts toward peace and demonstrate once again Russia's utter disregard for international law and human life. They discriminate strikes of 27 of August, which severely damaged diplomatic premises in Kiev, including the delegation of the European Union, represent a flagrant violation of the Vienna Conventions. I would like to make 3 points. First, we are appalled by Russia's recent attack on Kiev, and we strongly condemn the deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure in blatant violation of international humanitarian law. We call upon Russia to cease immediately such unlawful actions. We commend all UN and humanitarian agencies in Ukraine for the life-saving services they provide, and we thank them for the service. Second, on peace efforts, no negotiation can succeed while blood continues to be shed on the ground. We call for an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire as the necessary first step towards a comprehensive settlement. In full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its international recognized borders. We welcome the US-led initiatives and the decisive efforts of President Trump to put an end to the war, and we call on Russia to stop its armed aggression and withdraw its troops from Ukraine. Any attempt to alter borders by the use of force is unacceptable and constitutes a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundation of the international order. Third, no peace imposed upon Ukraine could ever be sustainable. A permanent peace agreement cannot be decided without Ukraine. It must rest on credible and enforceable security guarantees to prevent any recurrence of aggression in the future. Mr. President, Greece reiterates its unwavering solidarity with the people of Ukraine who have endured the devastating consequences of Russia's full-scale invasion for over 3.5 years. The war must end. We stand ready to support all international efforts aimed at securing a just, sustainable, and lasting peace, in full conformity with international law, the UN Charter, relevant UN resolutions, and the Helsinki Final Act. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Grecia su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación del Reino Unido.
Thank you, President, and I echo Greece's thanks for your stewardship of the Council in August. I'd also like to thank ASG Yencha for briefing us this afternoon. I also look forward to the participation of Her Excellency, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, in today's meeting. Only yesterday, the representative of the Russian Federation stood just outside this chamber and said to the media, I quote, "We believe in peace. We believe in diplomacy." Yet Russia's attack on Ukraine just the night before was one of the largest aerial attacks of its war. Russia says it believes in peace and diplomacy. Such brutal attacks say the opposite. Russia deployed nearly 600 drones and 31 missiles in an attack that hit civilians and civilian infrastructure. Among the homes and buildings destroyed in Kyiv, the British Council and the EU delegation suffered extensive damage. Deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure and civilian objects is a violation of international humanitarian law. At least 23 people, including 4 children, were killed by these strikes, and dozens more were wounded. We extend our condolences to the families and friends of those killed. It has been reported that among the children who were killed, the youngest was 2 years old. The Kremlin's actions reflect no desire for peace or diplomacy that I can detect. We are appalled by the suffering that Russia has inflicted on civilians, including a guard at the British Council office who was among those injured and hospitalised. We're equally outraged by the damage these strikes caused to neighbouring EU delegation building. But if Russia thinks it can intimidate us, it is wrong. This will only strengthen UK and Western resolve to support Ukraine. These strikes are the actions of a Russian government that is hell-bent on destroying Ukraine and sabotaging international peace efforts. As my Prime Minister has said, quite simply, this bloodshed must end. And there remains only one solution. Putin must, as Zelensky has done repeatedly, agree to a full and unconditional ceasefire immediately. President, every time I have to deliver a statement which marks another milestone in Russia's violence, I'm joined by 13 of my fellow council members, 14 Security Council members calling for a cessation of hostilities. It is easy to sit here and say that there must be peace. Yes, we all want peace, but only one of us has the power to make that happen immediately. President Putin had the power to stop this war when we called for it last month, and the month before that, and the month before that, all the way back to February 2022. How many people would still be alive today if President Putin had committed to peace and diplomacy instead of violence back then? Or better yet, if he had decided not to invade at all? I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Reino Unido su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Sierra Leona.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me join colleagues in really extending our commendation and congratulations to you and your delegation on your successful presidency this month, as this is the last scheduled meeting. Mr. President, I thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Janča for his sobering briefing on the grave escalation of the conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And I welcome the participation of Her Excellency Ms. Yulia Shcheredenko, Prime Minister of Ukraine, to this meeting. Sierra Leone is alarmed by a report of continuous airstrikes on heavily populated areas, particularly of Ukraine. On 27 August, there were reports of a massive airstrike involving more than 500 drones and missiles, as briefed, killed at least 23 people, including 4 children, in Kyiv and injured over 45 others, with many still feared to be trapped under rubble. The strikes damaged residential buildings, a shopping mall, and even diplomatic premises of the British Council and the European Union. This tragic episode regrettably reflects the wilder pattern of the conflict. The first half of 2025 has witnessed relentless aerial bombardments of populated areas, leaving behind death, destruction, and despair. Hospitals, schools, universities, businesses, and critical energy and water infrastructure have all been targeted. Retaliatory strikes have also caused civilian injuries and infrastructural damage inside the Russian Federation. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine reported that July 2025 registered the highest number of casualties, civilian casualties, since the early days of the conflict, with 286 civilians killed and 1,388 injured. August appears to be continuing this devastating trend. The toll since 2022 is staggering. More than 50,000 casualties alongside the displacement of over 10 million people. Millions, particularly children, now live in fear, deprived of safe shelter, quality education, and basic necessities such as clean water and electricity. More than 1,600 educational facilities have been damaged or destroyed, compounding their plight. Sierra Leone deplores the deliberate targeting of civilian and civilian infrastructure. International humanitarian law is unequivocal. Such attacks constitute war crimes. We stress that the principles of proportionality, precaution, and distinction must be fully respected. Operations near nuclear installations or other critical civilian sites are particularly unacceptable and risk catastrophic consequences. We therefore reiterate our call on the involved parties to prioritize the protection of civilians, to cease indiscriminate attacks, to refrain from military operations in and around civilian infrastructure, and to ensure humanitarian corridors are respected. Compliance with international law, including human rights law and the Geneva Conventions, is not optional. It is obligatory. We commend the ongoing humanitarian aid coordination efforts led by the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator and facilitated by OCHA under extremely difficult circumstances. With approximately 12.7 million people in Ukraine in need of humanitarian assistance, these efforts remain indispensable. We call for the safe, sustained, and unhindered delivery of aid, particularly to those in hard-to-reach areas and close to front lines. We further emphasize the importance of sustained and flexible funding for humanitarian and recovery programs, particularly in view of the upcoming winter season. Mr. President, this conflict is not confined to the borders of Ukraine or the Russian Federation. Its ripple effects are destabilizing global economies, undermining trust in the international system and norms, and aggravating food and energy insecurity. The disruption of grains export disproportionately affected developing countries, including in Africa, driving up prices and straining vulnerable economies. Most gravely, the conflict adds to a mosaic of geopolitical issues that are eroding the very integrity of the UN Charter. If internationally recognized borders can be redrawn by force and sovereignty principle not immutable, then the foundation of global peace and security is left unprotected. For Sierra Leone, the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of states are immutable principles. To compromise them is to compromise the rules-based international legal order itself. Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering support for the Charter of the United Nations and its core obligations under Article 2.3 that all member states must settle disputes by peaceful means. In this spirit, we recall the Council's recent adoption of Resolution 2774, which reaffirmed that the primary purpose of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security and to resolve disputes peacefully. It further called for a swift end to the conflict and a lasting peace between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. We also note the guidance of the General Assembly in its most recent resolution at the 11th Emergency Special Session, which underscored the urgent need to end the conflict this year. Sierra Leone aligns itself with these calls because peace must be the immediate priority. That peace, however, must be just, comprehensive, and sustainable. Only through genuine dialogue and good faith negotiations can the bloodshed end and stability return. With this in mind, and given the escalating toll of death, displacement, and destruction, the only viable path forward is through diplomacy and dialogue. We therefore support all initiatives, both within and beyond this Council, aimed at securing a stop in fighting, declaration of a pause to pave the way for a just, comprehensive, and sustainable peace. We take note of the recent confidence-building measures, including the exchange of prisoners of war, civilian detainees, and soldiers' remains, facilitated through talks in Istanbul. These are positive steps that should be built upon. We also welcome recent high-level engagement and urge that they translate into meaningful negotiations for unconditional ceasefire and eventually peace agreement. The international community, and above all this Council, must remain steadfast in its support for such efforts, supporting negotiations that address critical issues, including immutable borders, security guarantees, military capabilities, and regional stability. Resolution 2774 provides a framework, but it is the will and leadership of the member state that will determine whether peace is achieved. The stakes are too high for delay. The people of Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and indeed the wider world, deserve an end to this devastating war. Sierra Leone stands ready to work with all members of this Council and all parties concerned to ensure that leadership, goodwill, and the principles of the Charter prevail. Only then can we restore faith in international law, rebuild shattered lives, and reaffirm the UN's enduring purpose of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Sierra Leona su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de la República de Corea.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I also thank SG and Cha for the timely briefing and welcome the representative of Ukraine, His Excellency Prime Minister Sviridenko. Mr. President, we return once again to this August chamber under grim circumstances to discuss the most recent appalling attack against civilians and civilian infrastructures in Ukraine. For months, we have witnessed an expansion of heavy air attacks, and again, urgently called for a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. However, these calls are again being ignored as the Russian Federation continues to scale up its expensive drone and missile strikes on heavily populated civilian targets. The Republic of Korea condemns Russia's escalating attacks on civilian infrastructure. In the early hours of Thursday morning, Russia launched yet another disturbing drone and missile assault on high-rise residential buildings, educational institutions, and civilian transport as Kiev and other cities slept, killing at least 19, 4 of whom were children, and injuring over 60 others. And in addition to targeting Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure, Thursday's attacks also hit the EU mission and British Council. My delegation categorically condemns all such attacks on diplomatic and consular premises, which are contrary to international law and global norms. Thursday's attacks, carried out with nearly 600 drones and 31 missiles, represented Russia's deadliest attacks on Ukraine since July, as well as the second largest air assault since this illegal war began. These attacks represent clear violation of international humanitarian law. Civilians must be always protected and should never be targeted. Yet this recurrent and bloody scenario continues to play out weekly, shattering lives, families, and communities. They also exemplify again the urgency of ending this protracted horror. Mr. President, under this troubling backdrop, the Republic of Korea once again implores an immediate, full, and unconditional cessation of all hostilities. We continue to be supportive of all key diplomatic efforts to halt the bloodshed and end this war without further delay, and reiterate our deep appreciation for U.S. efforts toward this end. However, the continuing Russian attacks on Ukraine, such as Thursday morning's shocking barrage, not only threaten ongoing common global peace efforts, they directly undermine them. In this connection, my government is concerned about ongoing Russian North Korean military cooperation that is exacerbating the severity and the scope of this war and its bleak ramifications, not only for Ukrainian civilians, but also for peace and security in both the European and Asian regions. Mr. President, all parties must take swift and concrete steps toward an end of war agreement in line with the Security Council Resolution 2774 to ensure a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. For its part, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its guiding commitment to ending this war and standing with the Ukrainian peoples as they rebuild their country and chart a brighter, more secure future. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco a la delegación de la República de Corea su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de China.
主席，首先我要祝贺巴拿马即将完成本月安理会轮值主席的工作，并预祝韩国担任下月轮值主席一切顺利。我感谢严洽助理秘书长的通报。主席，当前乌克兰问题正进入谈判解决的关键阶段，中方支持一切有利于和平解决危机的努力，欢迎俄美、乌美、欧美 近期举行的一系列接触和谈判，乐见相关方保持接触，寻求解决办法。与此同时，地面的战事仍未停歇，俄乌持续针对对方实施无人机和导弹袭击，导致新的平民伤亡和基础设施损毁，令人深感痛心。这也表明，实现和平的道路漫长而曲折，需要各方共同做出更多努力。我讲3点：第一，希望当事方展现冷静克制，推动战场局势尽快降温。我们再次呼吁，在任何情况下，平民和民用基础设施都不应该成为袭击目标。冲突当事方应严格遵守国际人道法，切实保护平民和民用基础设施安全。第二，希望有关各方相向而行，保持对话谈判势头。当前各方在实现和平的一些关键问题上，立场主张还有不小差距。越是如此，越要保持信心，保持接触，展现政治意愿，体现灵活姿态，争取尽早达成和平协议。第三，希望国际社会凝聚共识，为危机的政治解决营造积极氛围。国际社会，特别是重要利益攸关方，应在停火止战、劝和促谈方面开展更多的外交努力，应为推动对话谈判发出更多的积极信号。主席，从战争爆发第1天起，中方就呼吁停火止战，坚持劝和促谈，推动政治解决。我们以习近平主席提出的4个应该为根本遵循，同当事方保持接触，派出特使开展穿梭外交，并在联合国发起成立乌克兰危机和平之友小组，凝聚和平共识，推动和平努力。中方愿继续同国际社会一道，为推动危机的早日政治解决发挥建设性作用。谢谢主席。
Agradezco a la delegación de China su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I want to join in congratulating you and the delegation of Panama for your excellent stewardship of the Council during the month of August. And I also thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. Mr. President, we meet today following yet another series of airstrikes on Ukraine, which killed at least 23 people, including children. 23 lives that would have been spared had the parties agreed to a cessation of hostilities. The strikes also destroyed, as we heard, a residential building and damaged premises belonging to the European Union Mission and British Council in Kyiv. Guyana is compelled to reiterate the following 3 messages. First, Russia's military action in Ukraine undermines international law and is contrary to the principles enshrined in the UN Charter of respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in the internal affairs of another sovereign state. The cost of this conflict, while borne most heavily by the Ukrainian people, is also being paid by civilians in the Russian Federation, the entire region, and the global community. We therefore reiterate our call for an urgent intensification of diplomatic dialogue to end the conflict, taking advantage of the pathways already created, and for immediate de-escalation of hostilities in both Russia and Ukraine. Lasting peace could never be achieved through the use of force, but rather by intense diplomatic effort. Ending this war peacefully must remain our foremost priority. Second, we reiterate our demand for full adherence to legal obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. This conflict, from its inception, has been characterized by violation after violation of international law, with numerous attacks against critical and civilian infrastructure, the abduction of children, the denial of humanitarian access, and the killing of humanitarian personnel. there have also been attacks against nuclear facilities. We once again call upon the conflict parties to fulfill their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and to take all necessary precautions to protect civilians. We also underscore the need to prioritize the protection of children. Third and final, the international community must continue to support efforts and confidence-building measures that could bring the two parties closer to the goal of negotiating a ceasefire. We commend the recent prisoner exchanges and the talks in Istanbul and hope that these can continue and will be matched by initiatives in other areas. In closing, Mr. President, Guyana will continue to support all efforts of the UN Secretary-General and other willing partners who have been working diligently towards sustainable peace, a peace that respects Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary Jenka, for your informative briefing. In recent weeks, the United States has undertaken exceptional efforts to bring the Russian-Ukraine war to an end. President Trump met face-to-face with Russian President Putin in Alaska on August 15th, the first summit-level meeting between our countries since Russia launched its invasion more than 3.5 years ago. President Trump then hosted Ukrainian President Zelensky and 7 other European leaders at the White House on August 18th to build on the progress made at the Alaska summit. The latest drone and missile attacks on Ukraine, which resulted in numerous civilian casualties and damage to residential areas, the offices of the EU delegation in Kyiv, and the building which houses the British Council, cast doubts on the seriousness of Russia's desire for peace. These strikes on civilian areas must stop immediately. We extend our deepest condolences to the victims and their families. Russia must decide now to move toward peace. The leaders of Russia and Ukraine must agree to meet bilaterally. President Trump has warned of further economic measures the United States could take if Russia instead chooses to continue this war, measures which could have far-reaching impact on Russia's future economic prosperity. The United States calls on the Russian Federation to avoid these consequences by stopping the violence and engaging constructively to end the war. With that, I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the delegation of the United States for their statements. I give the floor to the delegation of Algeria. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Miroslav Yencha, for his thorough briefing. Mr. President, my country, Algeria, has repeatedly expressed its concern over the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The consequences of this war are ongoing, leading to a deterioration of the humanitarian situation. Many innocent civilians have fallen. Others continue to suffer, including children, women, and older persons. With the continuation of confrontations, civilian infrastructure is also being destroyed, which is having a serious impact on the daily lives of civilians. What's more, information received yesterday noted the destruction of several diplomatic buildings in Kiev following explosions. Algeria reaffirms that the logic of confrontation will only lead to more violence and hostility. That undermines dialogue and negotiations and undermines diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful solution, including in the context of direct negotiations, which gave us the hope of seeing a just and lasting solution to the war. What's more, the continuation of the conflict has been reflected in many other regions of the world, including in developing countries that have not been spared. We have indeed seen upheaval in markets, particularly when it comes to the cost of foodstuffs and energy. Mr. President, we condemn violations of international law and would like to affirm the following. Firstly, we call upon the two parties, Russian and Ukrainian, to show restraint and to avoid further violence in order to spare civilians and to guarantee their safety and security. It is necessary to respect international law, including international humanitarian law, which calls for the protection of defenseless civilians and civilian infrastructure and diplomatic premises. Secondly, we call for upholding the logic of dialogue, negotiation, and consultation instead of that of escalation and confrontation. We must focus all diplomatic efforts on cooperation in order to achieve a just, comprehensive solution that can put an end to the war once and for all. In this context, Algeria commends the diplomatic efforts that recently led to summit meetings. And we are keen to see the Russian and Ukrainian leaders meet under the auspices of the United States, so as to achieve direct negotiations between the two parties. Third, we call for concerted collective efforts to create an environment that is conducive to dialogue, and so as to conduct negotiations to achieve a consensus between the two parties, removed from any polarization or any narrow geopolitical calculation. By way of conclusion, we are firmly committed to all international efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful, just, and lasting political solution on the basis of the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, taking into account the legitimate security concerns of both parties. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also join others in congratulating you and Panama in the excellent manner in which you steered the Council's work for the month of August. Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to extend my appreciation to ASG Yanka for his comprehensive briefing on the latest development in Ukraine. We remain gravely concerned by the recent escalations in Ukraine. The intensification of hostilities, including increased strikes on civilians and civilian infrastructure, serve as a stark reminder of the persistent volatility in the region and the severe toll being exacted on civilians. In this regard, I wish to underscore the following points. First, these developments highlight the urgent and ongoing need for all parties to prioritize protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. It is imperative that the international legal obligations are respected at all times in order to safeguard lives and preserve stability throughout this crisis. Second, we firmly maintain that there is no military solution to this conflict. Continued hostilities only serve to prolong the suffering of civilian population and undermine the prospect for a durable peace. Lasting solutions are found at the negotiating table, not through the use of force. Third, we welcome the recent diplomatic initiatives by President Trump and the U.S. to end the war in Ukraine, including the high-level meeting between the U.S. President and the Russian President in Alaska, as well as the meeting with the President of Ukraine and European leaders in Washington, D.C. Such efforts represent important steps toward fostering a dialogue, rebuilding trust, and laying the groundwork for just and sustainable peace. Fourth, we reiterate our call for immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. It is incumbent on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to prevent further deterioration of the situation and to create conditions conducive to sustainable negotiations. To conclude, Mr. President, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at tackling the root causes of this conflict and achieving just and lasting solution consistent with the principles of the United Nations Charter. The people of Ukraine and everyone affected by this war deserve a future defined by peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me also to start by congratulating you and your entire team for the successful and brilliant steering of this Council's work during current month. We also welcome the participation of Her Excellency the Prime Minister of Ukraine in today's meeting. I would also like to thank ASG Jancha for his briefing. Pakistan has repeatedly voiced its concerns on the continuing hostilities and devastating consequences of this conflict, particularly its humanitarian toll. It is regrettable that the conflict, which is now into its fourth year, continues to rage and devastate the lives and livelihoods of more and more people. We note with deep dismay the continuation in fighting, resulting in the loss of innocent civilian lives, including children. This is, as we have said before, both tragic and deplorable. Protection of civilians is paramount. International humanitarian law is clear and must be upheld universally. Mr. President, we regret the reports of damage caused to the EU office and the British Council in Kiev. The inviolability and sanctity of diplomatic and consular missions, as laid down in the Vienna Conventions, must be respected by all parties. The principles of IHL, especially distinction, proportionality, and precaution, must be scrupulously followed. Pakistan welcomes the recent diplomatic efforts spearheaded by the US President to bring an end to this conflict. Pakistan, too, from the very outset, has remained an ardent proponent of bringing an end to this conflict through dialogue and a negotiated settlement. We take particular note of the leadership-level contacts between the US and the Russian Federation, as well as summit-level interactions between the US and Ukraine and a group of leaders from the European continent who also have a stake in peace in the region. We remain hopeful that the diplomatic groundwork laid down at the start of the year, including Security Council Resolution 2774, which Pakistan supported, multiple rounds of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, and the recent high-level interactions would lead to a meaningful outcome, an early end to hostilities, and an enduring peace in the region. These efforts must not stop and should, in fact, be continued earnestly and followed up with more diplomacy, deeper engagement, and structured and sustained talks. We welcome the recent prisoner exchange between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We, however, note that the ongoing violence, death, and destruction from relentless attacks do not portend well for the ongoing peace efforts. We concur with ASG Jancha when he expressed the concern that diplomatic momentum may fade due to escalation in fighting. Mr. President, the pursuit of military means to resolve this conflict is a dead end. It would only deepen the suffering of the people. The way forward is in peaceful settlement and that passes through de-escalation and ceasefire. Only a sincere and meaningful dialogue which addresses the security concerns of all sides and which is anchored in the principles of UN Charter and international law, and which respects the relevant multilateral agreements, can help secure peace, which is both just and enduring. Pakistan will continue to support all efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The meetings on Ukraine that our Western colleagues requested follow the same fairly primitive template. Russia is accused of strikes on Ukrainian cities, and they try, without evidence, to assert that the targets of the attacks were allegedly civilian objects, ignoring the fact that during our strikes, civilian casualties are caused exclusively by falling shrapnel from missiles and drones that are shot down, or directly by Ukrainian air defense missiles that have gone off course. And the reason for that is also well known. The deployment by Ukraine of missile defenses in residential developments in violation of the basic norms of IHL, and yet targeted Ukrainian attacks involving missiles and drones on civilian objects on the territory of Russia are deliberately ignored. This is the ham-fisted formula that our Western colleagues and again, they seem to be filling up the room today like sardines. They could long ago have trained an AI to follow this scheme when writing their generic statements, given how inhuman and detached from reality it is. And perhaps they're already doing that, since there's nothing new that goes beyond this template that we've heard today. My response to these accusations today is probably also not going to contain anything new. Yes, we did indeed, in the night between the 27th and the 28th of August, in pursuit of the aim of demilitarizing Ukraine, strike objects that relate to the military-industrial complex of that country. As was announced today by the Ministry of Defense of Russia, 62% of the key military enterprises of the military-industrial complex of Ukraine have been damaged. The group missile and air strike targeted in particular military airfields, Air Force arms depots, hangars, airport aprons, and other transport and energy nodes in a number of Ukrainian oblasts. In Kiev and Kiev Oblast, the main targets were companies of the military-industrial complex, including the factories Artyom, Kievsky Radiozavod, Spetsoboronmash, Slavutich, and Ukrspets Systems. They were directly involved in the development and production of various forms of UAVs, and they have capacity for the repair and production of radar stations, fire control systems, and UAF communications equipment, as well as UAF assembly lines and warehouses. At the same time, the Kiev regime, as in the past, shamelessly and criminally used the tactic of a human shield by putting these enterprises of the defense complex, air defenses and electronic warfare, near residential developments and densely populated areas of cities. And so it's no surprise that once again, Ukrainian air defense missiles hit residential districts. And that was the reason for damage being caused to the buildings of the UK and EU missions, and also the death of civilians in partially destroyed residential buildings. However, these victims were not only not forcing the criminal regime to, at long last, remove air defenses from and military enterprises from residential districts, but are actually being used by them as a tool for political manipulation. Every such tragedy is intentionally whipped up to blame the deaths of Ukrainian civilians on Russia, to appeal to Western sponsors and international donors, to demand the introduction of new sanctions, and to angle for new arms deliveries. And that happened today as well. Before our eyes, with the complicity of Western members of the Security Council, the lives of the civilians of Ukraine have been turned into a bargaining chip, and human suffering is becoming a way to achieve mercenary foreign policy goals. In light of the irremediable hypocrisy of our Western colleagues and their reluctance to expose the true reason for people dying, Ukrainian citizens have long ago figured out what's going on. They quickly understood that the danger for them was coming from the Ukrainian air defense systems and not Russian strikes. You don't believe me? Well, just read Ukrainian social networks. There, people have for a long time been warning one another about the deployment of air defense and military enterprises near their homes and making fun of you, Western colleagues, and your awkward attempts to cover for the criminal Kiev regime. Mr. President, and there's another thing which is transforming today's meeting into a theater of the absurd. While emphasizing the victims and destruction in Ukrainian cities, the Western initiators of today's meeting are, as usual, deliberately ignoring the UAF's premeditated hunting of civilians, including women, children, and older persons on the territory of Russia. Ukrainian Nazis are intentionally using drones, strike drones, against apartment buildings and private residencies, civilian transport, agricultural machinery involved in collecting the harvest, and commercial and social facilities. Each day, Russian regions have tens and hundreds of drones launched against them. In the week from 18 to 24 August alone, the shelling of Ukrainian Nazis caused 140 civilian casualties. 120 people were wounded, including 8 minors, and 19 people died, including 1 child. Our Western colleagues aren't interested in those victims. They are part of their strategy to do harm to Russia at the hands of Ukraine, for the sake of which their anti-Russia project in the past was created by them. Moreover, they intentionally overlook the fact that our combined strike on objects of the military-industrial complex of Ukraine came in response to what has been going on for the last 2 weeks after the Alaska summit, that is to say, attacks on oil refineries in Russia. It's clear that these strikes have no strategic military significance because they don't impact the situation on the contact line. Their true aim is an attempt to damage civilian energy infrastructure and to interrupt fuel supplies. Moreover, behind these actions is the calculation of provoking retaliatory measures from Russia to then misrepresent them as disproportionate and then accuse Moscow of sabotaging any attempts at peace talks. In this context, the strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline are telling. It is one of the key routes for the delivery of oil to Europe. The most recent act of sabotage on the 22nd of August was so serious that it knocked out the pipeline for several days. In this case, this is a provocation designed to harm the economic interests of EU countries and infrastructure that ensures the energy stability of the region. Under pressure from Hungary and Slovakia, even the European Commission was forced to react to this. In other words, they are today playing up the consequences of Russia's retaliatory actions and intentionally not mentioning the fact of what provoked these strikes. It's a clumsy and hypocritical tactic that shows the selective blindness and double standards of our Western colleagues. Mr. President, these same glaring double standards are clearly on display when the Western accomplices of the Kiev regime continue to ignore what, even by the standards of the Maidan, are skyrocketing human rights violations by the Zelensky regime. We're talking about the mass trampling of fundamental human rights and freedoms, including those of the Russian-speaking population, the hateful harassment of dissenters, attempts to outlaw the canonical Orthodox Church. Even by the most modest calculations, around 7,000 Ukrainians, without reason, exclusively on political grounds, have been deprived of their freedom. And this also applies to clergy from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and also journalists and ordinary citizens who express an opinion that is not in line with the position of the regime. Recently, we together received a letter from a former deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, who is now accused of high treason. His name is Alexander Dublinsky. The facts that he touches upon, including the death from torture in the dungeons of the Kiev regime of the American journalist Consuelo Lira, were confirmed by international human rights organizations and referred to in the report of the U.S. State Department on human rights in Ukraine for 2024. Just the other day, Security Council members received another letter, this time from the journalist Diana Panchenko. She asked the UN Secretary-General to take measures to protect political prisoners. She refers also to reports from the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which notes systematic cases of arbitrary detention without official charges, the use of torture, and denial of access to justice under the Kiev regime. Attached to the letter is a list of more than 550 victims of political persecution in Ukraine. Even a brief analysis of the content of these letters allows us to draw a clear conclusion. The Zelensky regime has created a machine of repression that is based on violating fundamental human rights and freedoms. The state security bodies, obedient courts, and the security and defense agencies are being used to intimidate society and prevent dissent. How much longer will Security Council members ignore these cries for help and make out as though nothing of the sort is happening in Ukraine? And how much longer will the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime ignore the glaring evidence of rampant corruption among the elite of the Zelensky regime? At the beginning of the week, several Western media outlets reported that a former investigator of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine that had fled to Europe managed to bring with him several thousand pages of internal documents that exposed corruption schemes in the highest echelons of the Ukrainian authorities. Yelena K., whose surname is not provided, led a task force tracing offshore assets. The selectively published purchase and sale agreements and information from bank transfers indicates that Zelensky and those close to him used an extensive network of shell companies to launder illegal income and subsequently to purchase elite real estate abroad. And we're talking about an amount of more than $1.2 billion. And hundreds of properties, including in Spain, the UK, France, and Italy. I'm confident that this is just the tip of the iceberg, but that too is something that in the West they try to turn a blind eye to. Do you really not understand that by keeping afloat such rotten, corrupt, and misanthropic regimes, you are undermining what is left of your reputation in the world? Mr. President, if our Western colleagues were able to speak the truth, they would long since have acknowledged that for many years the West had been creating in Ukraine direct threats to the security of the Russian Federation and essentially indulged the actions of the Kiev regime to exterminate on Ukrainian territory everything Russian and the Russian-speaking population, in gross violation of the UN Charter, which requires upholding human rights, including linguistic and religious rights, as well as numerous international conventions, as well as the Constitution of Ukraine itself. This admission would be an excellent starting point for a long-term and sustainable settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. That's not happened yet, but there is some optimism coming from the fact that some of our partners, first and foremost the United States, are more and more understanding the need to address the root causes of the conflict, without which it won't be possible to resolve it. More and more understanding the need to address the root causes of the conflict, without which it won't be possible to resolve it. These sorts of trends that in particular emerged during the recent Russo-American summit in Alaska are keeping the Zelensky regime up at night, as well as its European sponsors. And so that is why they're doing everything they can to try to outmaneuver the positive understandings achieved in Alaska, or at least to distort them. This is most evident now when it comes to the issues of security. In that regard, I would like to declare to be unacceptable any new attempts to resolve collective security issues in circumvention of Russia without taking into account our interests and concerns. These attempts were what provoked the crisis situation in the Euro-Atlantic area, and a solution to that is not yet in sight. We have repeatedly explained our position of principle on this, a cornerstone of which is mutual respect and equality. We oppose any impingement on the sovereignty and independence of other states, and we will not allow such attempts when it comes to Russia. Our legitimate interests in the security sphere will be upheld hard and fast. In the form of security guarantees, the collective West is promoting one-sided, essentially neo-colonial initiatives to deter Russia. This relates to the clearly unfeasible European plans for the further militarization of Ukraine, the building up of the military presence of NATO countries in the Black Sea region, including airspace patrols. And they are also shamelessly proposing to limit the number of guarantor countries to the key states of NATO. Colleagues, the provision of security guarantees is not a condition, but rather the result of a peace settlement after the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine have been removed. The security guarantees in the form that they are being voiced by our former European partners would only facilitate a further degradation of strategic stability at the regional and global levels. In this regard, it would be appropriate to recall the initiative of the Ukrainian side itself, which was proposed by Ukraine in April 2022 in Istanbul. The Ukrainian negotiating team at the time outlined the main principles of an agreement on concluding the hostilities and ensuring a sustainable settlement. That included Ukraine's abandonment of entry into NATO or any other
нейтрального и безъядерного статуса. В этом контексте украинская сторона предложила.
The Ukrainian side proposed, and our delegation agreed to develop security guarantees, the parties to which would be all of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, as well as specific states that may have an interest in joining this group of security guarantors. It is evident that Kiev's proposal presupposed that those guarantees would be equal and the security of all interested parties, including Ukraine's neighbors, would be ensured on an equal, indivisible basis. We supported that option. The document was initialed and we were prepared to sign an official treaty. We understand it now as well and we are prepared to consider it. Unlike the various other schemes being discussed that essentially boil down to the territory that is still under Ukrainian control being buttressed by NATO countries, even going as far as the introduction of military contingents there. For Russia, that is absolutely unacceptable because it could lead to an uncontrolled escalation of the conflict with unpredictable consequences. Those that advance such ideas are not interested in resolving the crisis, rather they want to perpetuate it, possibly through a temporary freeze. That is not at all what we were talking about in Alaska. We also note many attempts to distort the idea of holding a Russo-Ukrainian summit and assertions that Russia is allegedly not prepared to do so. Quite the opposite. We have repeatedly said that we can consider this scenario, but provided that there is thorough prior preparation for such a meeting and the substantive content of it. Otherwise, it would simply not have any meaning. We do stand ready to work in any formats with the understanding that that should be in good faith and honest. A possible Russo-Ukrainian high-level meeting could draw up mutual agreements that are based on well-understood steps and measures following the Alaska summit. However, what can we talk about really if Zelensky is publicly saying that he does not, for example, want to discuss the question of territory, in so doing throwing down the gauntlet to President Donald Trump, who openly said that that should be the subject of negotiations. The head of the Kiev regime has also clearly stated that no one can ban Ukraine from joining NATO, which also runs counter to what was said by President Trump. Zelensky also is not intending to repeal the laws that essentially ban the Russian language, destroy Russian culture, education, Russian language media, and the canonical UOC. If the expired Ukrainian president is not prepared for these discussions and in general does not want to make any compromises, which he has repeatedly highlighted over the past 10 days, then it's not entirely clear why he is insisting on a meeting with Russian President Putin. Mr. President, to achieve mutually acceptable solutions that would guarantee a non-repetition of the conflict, diplomatic efforts must be intensified. I would remind you that during the third round of the renewed Istanbul negotiating track on the 23rd of July, we proposed that the Ukrainian side consider the creation of 3 working groups on political, humanitarian, and military issues. We believe that this would allow us to more specifically consider the agenda items, and that could be useful in terms of bringing our positions closer together and achieving a settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. More than a month has gone by since then, but we have still not got a response from Ukraine. We believe that this matter and the course of the negotiations in Istanbul in general to be something of a litmus test for what Kiev is really interested in. Is it diplomatic work or simply PR and the sabotage of constructive mediation efforts? Thank you for your attention.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Panama. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we would like to thank ASG Yencha for participating in this meeting and also for his detailed briefing on the security situation in Ukraine. We note the participation of Her Excellency Yulia Syrydenko, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and we also welcome the participation of the representatives of Poland, Estonia, Norway, Germany, Romania, and the European Union. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. Your Excellencies, Panama echoes the statement issued yesterday by Secretary General Guterres. He condemned the Russian attacks on Kiev, Ukraine, during the morning of the 28th of August. We also condemn them, and we echo his call for an immediate end to the bombing. Panama laments the high toll of civilian deaths, including children, caused by this latest tragic attack, and we would like to extend our condolences to the bereaved families. This war has shaken the foundations of the international system, and its only tangible results to date are the thousands of people who have died, including soldiers, civilians, children, and persons with disabilities, as well as countless injured on both sides. We have seen with dread how residential areas and critical infrastructure on both sides have been attacked. And now this has even affected diplomatic premises belonging to the European Union and the British Council. They have also now been affected, which blatantly violates the 1961 Vienna Convention. 6.9 million Ukrainians have had to seek refuge outside their country, while 3.7 million have been obliged to move within their own country. The repercussions of this tragedy are also global in terms of food insecurity, the surge in energy costs, and increasing economic instability throughout the world, whose consequences will take years to abate. Your Excellencies, 4 years of war have brought about appalling human suffering. The military path, which some are insisting on maintaining, is as futile as it is vicious. Dialogue is the only way to find common ground to pave the way for a peaceful, lasting solution to this crisis. Panama welcomes the recent diplomatic efforts within the meetings arranged in Anchorage and Washington, which aim to build bridges ultimately to end this protracted situation, this tragic situation in Ukraine. In this council, many delegations have repeatedly called for a cessation of hostilities and for a fair, lasting peace agreement, which must respect Ukraine's political independence and sovereignty. This historic moment requires leadership, and this means bold decisions, consistent with the principles of the United Nations Charter. The consequences of inaction are simple: more death, more bloodshed, and more suffering. That is why Panama, once again, reiterates its support for all diplomatic efforts to be undertaken to curb the violence and to build peace. Thank you. I resume my function now as President of the Council. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Yulia Syrienko, Prime Minister of Ukraine.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm honored to address today the UN Security Council, and I'm grateful to the Presidency of Panama for convening this emergency meeting at Ukrainians' request. We ask for this meeting as the Council should not be sidelined in addressing Russia's terror attack yesterday. The Charter entrusts the Council with a primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security. For the people of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy, my native Chernihiv, and many other regions across Ukraine, there have been neither peace nor security. Just yesterday night, Russia employed 629 airborne weapons. There were Shahed strike drones and other UAVs. They were cruise, air ballistic missiles. Russia again targeted residential buildings and claimed innocent lives. As of now, 25 people were killed, including 4 children. I just wanted to show some of the photos of people that have been killed yesterday, 25 of them. 63 others were injured, among them 11 children. The youngest victim was a girl, not yet 3 years old. Born under Russian shelling in October 2022, she was killed by Russian shelling in August 2025. Among other civilian facilities, the strike also severely damaged the premises of the EU delegation to Ukraine. An attack on a diplomatic mission is utterly unacceptable and demands strong condemnation and an appropriate response from the international community. We are grateful to all who have expressed solidarity with Ukraine and its people following the Russian heinous attack. I would particularly like to thank the UN Secretary General for his strong condemnation of Russian shelling and for supporting efforts to achieve a just, comprehensive and lasting peace in line with the UN chapter. President Zelensky spoke with the Secretary General yesterday to discuss the necessary steps to stop the killings. At the same time, alongside words of support, we value concrete action that both strengthen our defense capabilities and save human lives. Ukraine urgently requires additional air defense systems to protect our people, to protect our territory, as well as long-range strike capabilities to neutralize Russian military facility from which attacks are launched. Distinguished members, let me be clear. These killings are deliberate acts of terror. It's an informed decision taken by Moscow to continue its systematic campaign to terrorize civilians and extinguish any semblance of normal life. Yesterday, Russia again responded brutally to our attempts to engage them in a civilized dialogue, in the language of international law, peace, and respect for human life. Russia continues to choose killing over ending the war. We should take this into account in our efforts aimed at peaceful resolution and establishment of reliable security guarantees. These guarantees shall protect both Ukrainian sovereignty and the lives of Ukrainian people, especially children. Our people must feel safe already today. That's why ceasefire remains an essential prerequisite for successful future negotiation. How can genuine talk can be conducted while Russia's contribution remains the bodies of Ukrainian children retrieved from the rubble? Just look at this photo and you would understand everything. Russia is recognized perpetrator of crimes against Ukrainian children. For the third consecutive year, Russia has been placed on the shame list in the Secretary General reports on children and armed conflict. Yesterday, Russia airstruck on Kiev killed 4 children. Since the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion, at least 20 children have been sexually abused by Russian forces. Another 2,139 have been wounded, and 2,193 remain missing. Tens of thousands more have been stolen. 1.6 million trapped under Russian control in the occupied territories of Ukraine. 10-month-old Margarita Prokopenko was among them. In 2022, Russian official took her from Kherson Children's House. In Moscow, her documents were forged. She was given a new Russian birth certificate with a new name. They faked her birthplace too, and she was later adopted by Sergei Mironov, a politician close to Putin. Now she's Marina Mironova from Podolsk, Moscow region. A Ukrainian baby stolen, her name wiped away, her identity destroyed. Margarita's case is not isolated. It's policy. Ukrainian children are stripped from family, from language, from memory, from history. Mr. President, Russia kills children from a distance with missiles and with drones. And those who fall under its control, it steals. Russia erases their Ukrainian identity. Children are forced to forget who they are. Some are drafted into Russia's army. They kill and die fighting against their own people. The council cannot stay silent. Child abduction must end, and every Ukrainian child must be returned home now, before more lives are shattered. Russia's unlawful war must be stopped. All killings and attacks must stop. Violation of the UN Charter must stop. And we all know they will stop as soon as Russia is stopped. That is why our soldiers are doing on the ground, stopping Russia's advance. That is what we expect from the international community in global forum. Peace requires both strengthening security assistance to Ukraine and intensifying pressure on Russia until it demonstrates a genuine readiness for negotiation in a good faith. As long as Moscow rejects peace initiatives, it's imperative to intensify diplomatic, economic, military pressure on Russia. This includes swift adoption of the European Union 19th sanction package, full disconnection of Russia from international financial systems, sanctions against the so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers, the imposition of strong tariffs to undermine Russia's war economy, and the strengthening of personal sanctions against Russian political and military leadership to ensure they cannot evade accountability. Russia must be deprived of the means to finance its war and its crimes. Let me reiterate that strengthening our defense capacity will also serve the goal of encouraging Russia to engage more constructively with international peace efforts. Mr. President, Ukraine remains ready to give diplomacy a genuine chance with the goal of achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. We highly value the diplomatic efforts of President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the European leaders. Yet Russia's ongoing attack undermines and devalue these efforts by the American leadership, supported by many European states and states from other regions of the world. Let me emphasize, the people of Ukraine still hope that this Council and its member states, who have consistently emphasized the need for cessation of the hostilities, will now show the courage to turn word into action by supporting a relevant solution on the matter. Restoring respect for international law, above all the UN Charter and its principle of territorial integrity, will send a clear message. Aggression must be punished, never rewarded. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Sviridенко for her statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Poland.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by thanking Panama for convening today's meeting and Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenca for his briefing. I also appreciate the presence of Prime Minister Sviridенko today here with us. Poland supports the statement to be delivered by the EU. We have all heard just moments ago, the accounts of the most tragic consequences of another Russian attack on the night of August 27th. Poland once again extends its deepest condolences to all those affected. Such systemic attacks on civilian targets are war crimes, and they demand accountability. We will continue to support all international and national efforts to bring those responsible to justice. Among the casualties of these indiscriminate assaults were diplomatic premises, including the offices of the European Union delegation and the British Council. These are not military targets. And let me take a moment to remind this chamber that on April 14th last year, the Russian permanent representative spoke from this very floor about the sanctity of diplomatic missions and about the protections enshrined in international law. He claimed that the Council knows very well that an attack on a diplomatic mission is considered a casus belli under international law. And if a Western mission had been hit, those countries would immediately retaliate and argue in this chamber that they were right to do so. So I ask, how do those words stand now? We do not retaliate. Instead, the Ukrainian, European, US leaders, with support of all peace-loving countries in the world, continue to engage in or support talks to achieve a ceasefire and stop the killing of civilians in Ukraine. Russia, on the other hand, is demonstrating its stance on peace by sending over 620 drones and missiles, escalating its brutal assaults on Ukrainian cities and innocent people. Actions, Mr. President, speak louder than words. Russia, regrettably, pretends to negotiate, while at the same time undermining diplomatic efforts and attempting to seize more Ukrainian land. Now, if Russia hopes to break the spirit of resistance and solidarity, it is gravely mistaken. Recent strikes only strengthen our determination and resolve to support Ukraine. Poland calls on allies to impose additional restrictive measures that will further weaken Moscow's capacity to wage war. We all know the truth. Russia is facing growing economic and social pressure. And because of this, it wants to force its maximalist goals on Ukraine. And it wants to do it fast. But let me be clear, Russia's blatant disregard for peace cannot and will not go unanswered. Russia will be held accountable. We will apply sustained pressure, and we will stand firmly by Ukraine's side. Mr. President, I took note that the Russian representative fled the room filled with the representatives of international community that he believed were sardines. But perhaps it is a good omen, because indeed it does take a collective unity and resolve of all of us, the members of international community, to force Russia to abandon its terror tactics, engage in genuine negotiations, and, just like the Russian representative, go home. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the delegation of Poland for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Estonia.
Thank you, President. Your Excellency, Prime Minister, I speak on behalf of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We align ourselves with the statement of the European Union. We thank ASG Gencha for his briefing and the Presidency for convening us at this critical moment. Despite international efforts, it is evident that Russia has no intention of agreeing to a ceasefire. Putin does not seek even a temporary ceasefire, let alone a lasting peace. Every time he has made promises of hope to the international community, to the Security Council, or to mediators such as the United States, Ukrainians have instead been met with yet another wave of brutal and devastating attacks. The most recent attacks in Kiev on August 28 are a clear example of that. It was the second largest aerial attack since the start of the full-scale invasion, involving over 600 drones and missiles, coming just weeks after the Alaska summit between President Trump and Putin, where the Kremlin leader was trying to deceive us into believing he sought peace. These attacks left at least 23 Ukrainian civilians dead, among them 4 children. Among those killed was a 2.5-year-old child, born after the full-scale invasion and killed before ever knowing peace. Sadly, this story is just one among countless tragedies, where lives have been ruined or lost since February 2022. Behind every figure lies a human tragedy: families torn apart, children illegally deported, homes destroyed, communities shattered. Furthermore, the recent attacks on August 28 targeted and damaged also the European Union and the British Council offices in Kiev. This demonstrates that Russia will not cease its campaign of terror against Ukraine, even striking diplomatic facilities in clear violation of the Vienna Convention. Russia only pretends to have a desire for peace while relentlessly pursuing its goal of subjugating Ukraine and reshaping Europe's security order to fit its own designs. President, just a few days ago, on August 24, Ukraine marked its Independence Day. It is profoundly disturbing that in the 21st century, a European country, a full member of the United Nations, must celebrate its independence while almost one-fifth of its territory remains brutally occupied by a permanent member of the Security Council, the very body created to protect, not to undermine or destroy. Yet Ukraine has shown remarkable courage and resilience in defending its sovereignty and statehood against aggression. We pay tribute to the determination of the Ukrainian people and reaffirm our unwavering support to Ukraine's independence, freedom, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. Our message is clear. Russia is the aggressor. Its imperialistic objectives remain unchanged. The root cause of this war lies in Putin's refusal to accept the collapse of the Soviet Union. And a just and lasting peace must be grounded in the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and international law. The occupation of any territory of Ukraine by Russia will never be recognized by the international community, neither de jure or de facto. Russia must be held fully accountable for the crime of aggression and for every war crime committed. Perpetrators must face justice, including through a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. There can be no lasting peace without accountability. The Baltic states stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Defending Ukraine means defending the sovereign equality of all member states, large and small, the core principle on which the United Nations was founded. Mr. President, as I speak here now, there are currently another attack on Ukraine underway, where planes and drones are in the air. So this is the situation we're right now. I thank you.
Agradezco. I thank the delegation of Estonia for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Norway.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 5 Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, and my own country, Norway. Thank you, President, for convening this emergency meeting. And let me also thank you, ASD Jencha, for your briefing, and to Your Excellency, Prime Minister of Ukraine, Severdenko, for being here today and for your powerful remarks. President, on 28 August, another deadly flow of Russian attacks hit civilians in Ukraine. More than 20 people were killed in their homes, including children. Hundreds of missiles and drones fired, damaging also the offices of the EU mission and the British Council, as many have stressed today. We echo the Secretary General's and Council members' principled condemnation of these attacks. Once again, Russia has demonstrated its complete disregard for civilian lives and also diplomatic missions. The aim is clear: to spread terror and undermine efforts to end the war. Our response is even stronger support for Ukraine. President, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine remains a blatant violation of international law. We commend all member states who stand up for Ukraine and its sovereignty and territorial integrity. International law is universal. It must be respected everywhere at all times. We expect all members of this Council and of the UN to reaffirm a core principle of the UN Charter that international borders must not be changed by force. Since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Russia's strategic aim of subjugating Ukraine has remained unchanged. The list of unfolding horrors in Ukraine, many of which may amount to war crimes, are causing immense human suffering. Russia must end this war. It must end its meaningless bloodshed. President, a full and unconditional ceasefire is the necessary first step. Ukraine has been ready for a ceasefire for several months. Only Russia stands in the way. Peace in Ukraine cannot be negotiated without Ukraine's participation. Security guarantees will be needed. The people of Ukraine need a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in accordance with international law, not a pause for Russia to prepare for renewed aggression. The Nordic countries are ready to play an active role in combining the efforts of the coalition of the willing with those of the US to ensure the strength of these security guarantees. There must be no limitations on Ukraine's armed forces or on its cooperation with third countries. Ukraine is the only one who can decide which alliances it seeks. It has been said before in this chamber, but it needs to be repeated. The situation for Ukrainians living under Russian occupation is deeply alarming. Their human rights are violated. Deported and forcibly transferred children must come home safely. Thousands of illegally detained civilians should be released immediately. We demand that Russia complies with international humanitarian law and allows full, safe, rapid, and unimpeded humanitarian access in the occupied territories. Mr. President, Russia's war against Ukraine and its continued hybrid activities against Europe must come to an end now. We, the Nordics, will continue to scale up our military and civilian support to Ukraine, in close collaboration with the US, with the EU, and partners across the world. As long as Russia continues its war of aggression, we, together with partners and allies, will continue to increase the pressure on Russia's war economy. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación. I thank the delegation of Norway for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Germany.
Mr. President, thank you for convening the meeting today and for the chance to speak. Let me at the outset say that I am happy that the Prime Minister of Ukraine is able to be present today. And allow me to thank Assistant Secretary Jenča for his insightful briefing at the beginning. And I would like to say that Germany aligns itself with a statement to be delivered by the European Union. Mr. President, while we are here discussing the unprovoked Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children in Kiev and other cities of Ukraine are preparing for another night of fear. And as they lie down to sleep, they dread to witness yet another abhorrent attack, an attack such as the one 2 days ago, where, as the Prime Minister said, 25 people lost their lives, including 4 children, in this brutal Russian airstrike. This is an illegal attack, and it's a discriminatory attack which we utterly condemn. And I would like to join many others around the table in extending my condolences to you, Prime Minister, to your country, and especially to the families of the victims. Of course, just as many others, we were shocked to learn also that the building of the EU delegation and the British Council suffered serious damages. and of course that a security guard of the British Council was injured and hospitalized through this attack. Two facts remain evident after these attacks. First of all, that Russia has demonstrated again its blatant disregard of the most basic norms of international law and international humanitarian law. And secondly, that the Ukrainian people continue to show admirable resilience and determination in defending their country and their sovereignty. Mr. President, I think we have to all ask ourselves what the intention of Russia is and why Russia is conducting these indiscriminate attacks against innocent civilians. For weeks, actually months, Russian leaders and diplomats have been claiming to seek negotiations and peace, but at the same time, Russia relentlessly launches rockets into Ukraine and into residential areas of Ukraine. The position of Ukraine, on the other hand, is clear. Ukraine has suffered an illegal invasion, which has cost more than 13,000 lives to this day, and yet it stands ready for an unconditional ceasefire. Mr. President, I think there are no excuses for member states who truly stand behind the principles of the UN Charter to look away. And every government that wishes to play a constructive role and every member state that seeks a diplomatic solution should increase pressure on the aggressor in order to finally stop the killing. My question, and the question we should ask the Russian Federation, is simple. If Russia is sincere about peace, why can it not agree to a ceasefire? Let there be no doubt, Germany, together with its European allies and others, will spare no effort to achieve an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire and ultimately just and lasting peace and long-term security for the people of Ukraine that must be rooted in the principles of the UN Charter. The territorial integrity of UN member states must be respected and international borders must not be changed by force. Germany, together with its allies, will support Ukraine in its right to defend itself as long as it takes. Mr. President, every night the people of Ukraine have to spend in fear is one too much, and it is time to act. Thank you very much.
A la delegación de Alemania.
I thank the delegation of Germany for their statements, and I'll give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the European Union delegation to the United Nations.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting, and thank you to ASG Jenscha for his updates, and a really warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Ukraine in this chamber. An honor to have you. Colleagues, as high-level talks for peace are ongoing, as European leaders work with Ukraine and our allies to stop the killing, as we are hopefully reaching finally a moment of truth for peace in Ukraine, Russia has once again shown its true intentions with another massive and brutal overnight attack against Ukrainian cities and civilians. Ordinary civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, have paid the ultimate price for Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, and illegal aggression. Without the effective intervention of Ukrainian air defenses, who reportedly destroyed 589 out of 629 Russian drones and missiles, the civilian toll would have undoubtedly been dramatically higher. I was shocked to learn that multiple Russian missiles also struck close to the EU delegation in Kiev, causing severe damage to our premises by the shock waves. Fortunately, none of our colleagues were injured, but a security guard of the British Consul was. I thank many of you in this room and outside for your statements of solidarity and concern, which I promise you I will convey to my colleagues in Kiev. We will, of course, not be intimidated. Such blatant violations of international law and the inviolability of diplomatic premises only strengthen our resolve to stand with Ukraine and to stand with the Ukrainian people. Colleagues, this latest Russian attacks are part of a broader plan. Over the past few months, Russia has intensified its attacks across Ukraine, targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Intentionally directing an attack against civilians or civilian objects is a war crime, in case anyone needs to be reminded of it. The increasingly tone-deaf and hypocritical statements the Russian Federation makes in this chamber simply underscore the cynical intentionality of their continued aggression against a sovereign country, a free country, and blatant violations of international law. Our objective, dear friends, remains clear. The European Union supports an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire. We also welcome the efforts of the United States to seek an end to Russia's war of aggression and to stop the killing. As European Union, we contribute to these efforts in order to achieve a just and lasting peace and long-term security for Ukraine and for our continent. I urge all members of this Council to use their influence and maximize pressure on Russia now to accept an immediate ceasefire and to work towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. In addition, the European Union strongly condemns support by third countries and actors and entities therein, which enable Russia to sustain its war of aggression. We urge all countries to immediately cease any direct or indirect assistance to Russia in its war of aggression. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression against Ukraine and for these other serious crimes under international law, as well as for the damage, the massive damage caused by its war. Colleagues, on the 21st of August, we celebrated Ukraine's Independence Day. We celebrated the exceptional resilience of Ukrainians and what they have demonstrated, the courage, the bravery in defending their right to exist as a country. Russia's continued aggression and neo-colonial actions remind us that independence and freedom can never be taken for granted. That is why the European Union will remain united in providing political, financial, economic, humanitarian, military, and diplomatic support to Ukraine as it exercises its inherent right of self-defense. Mr. President, in closing, we will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in defense of the UN Charter and international law. I respectfully submit that this Council, without any wavering or any hesitation, do the same. At a time when Russia intensifies its killings and continues to pursue its illegal objectives instead of peace. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Romania.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for allowing my delegation to take the floor this afternoon, the last day of your presidency, which you very steered very ably. The sense of urgency in asking to allow Romania to participate in this meeting is given by the latest massive and successive attacks undertaken by Russia against Ukraine in the last 48 hours, and even more than that. I want to thank ASG ENCHA for the briefing, but I want to acknowledge very importantly the key points that the Prime Minister Zviderenko made today. I also want to put on record, Mr. President, the regrettable nature of the comment made by a permanent member of Security Council disregarding the legitimate and genuine interest of the wider international community to a matter that is so relevant for the international peace and security. We do that now as we do on many other occasions and many other issues, and I think this is the message that is echoed from this chamber, that the international community, supporting the mission of the Security Council and enabling this council, this body, which created so many expectations around the world,
to fulfill the ambitions and the goals of the UN Charter. And it's very much important to continue to respect each other and to continue exactly along a path of cooperation, understanding, with the principles of international law and the Charter at the core of our work. Now, the latest missiles attack on Kiev on 27th of August was followed less than 24 hours later by a drone attack on a Ukrainian ship on the Danube Delta near the Romanian border and near the Black Sea. We are waiting for further details about the impact of the attacks, but the civilian lives of those living nearby the Danube River were irresponsibly put at risk. In this context, I would like to put on record our strong condemnation of Russia's continuous and indiscriminate attacks affecting the sovereignty of Ukraine in the immediate vicinity of Romania. We emphasize the irresponsible nature of these attacks and their serious implications for national security. We are appalled by the frequent and large missiles and drone attacks on Kiev, targeting civilians, civilian infrastructure, and again, diplomatic compounds. And we stand in solidarity with our partner countries, with Ukraine, and we continue to support Ukraine as long as it takes to reject this blatant aggression. The latest attacks launched by Russia in the last 48 hours confirm Moscow's pattern of aggression against Ukraine on land or by sea and river. The war triggered by Russia affects maritime security on the Black Sea and the commercial shipping both regionally and globally. And these continuous attacks are not the path to peace. And we need peace. In February 2025, this year, the General Assembly and the Security Council agreed on that. We need a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine that puts at its core the principles of the UN Charter and international law. And we also need an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire. Just like other speakers previously, Romania welcomes the efforts undertaken by the United States to put an end to Russia's war of aggression and to save lives. And last but not least, Mr. President, accountability is more needed than ever as we keep witnessing Russia's actions against fundamental principles enshrined in the UN Charter and the Human Rights Universal Declaration. The war started 3.5 years ago by Russia is not only against Ukraine and its people. We have said it time and again. The Russian aggression is a blatant violation of the UN Charter and international law, and it is high time now to advance on the path of peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Romania for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. But before adjourning the meeting, as this is the last scheduled meeting of the Council for the month of August, I would like to express the sincere appreciation of the delegation of Panama and our entire team to the members of the Council and to the Secretariat of the Council for all the support they have given us throughout the month of August, and for all your cooperation, without which we would not have been able to fulfill our duty. Indeed, it has been a busy month in which we rallied to consensus on several important issues within our purview. We could not have done it alone, and without the hard work, support, and positive contributions of every delegation and the representatives of the Secretariat, including the technical support team, conference service officers, interpreters, translators, verbatim reporters, and security staff. As we end our presidency, I know I speak on behalf of the Council in wishing the delegation of the Republic of Korea the very best of luck in the month of September. The meeting is adjourned.
Waffen. Steckau Hesset. Steckau Hesset.